elderly as witnesses of the infinite. I'd like to praise the Dicastery for organizing this event. I'd like to speak with you as an elderly. I don't want to refer to the script I prepared. So we have spoken about elderly. I'm 81, so I'm fully in the category of elderly. Because we elderly, the current elderly, let me say that, me, Giacomo, and the others born from the 1945 to 1950, we are the first generation of mass elderly. It had never happened before in history. Elderly have always existed. In the scriptures, we have seen that, but we have never seen such a huge number of elderly. And this is not just a matter of numbers, because in Italy we are 14 million strong. If elderly are actually a burden, 2,000 elderly, not important. 14 million elderly would mean that Italy is going to fail. We need to understand, and we haven't understood it yet, of this new population which has emerged. And there is no political, economic, cultural, healthcare, and spiritual thoughts, with the only common misconception, with the exception of just one misconception. We are to be discarded. This is detrimental for the society and for the church. For me, this is a serious problem. For instance, knowing that in Italy, in all the dioceses, there is a priest for the young and no priest for the elderly. And when a priest exists, is in the healthcare commission. But we are the most numerous ones. We are the most frequent attendees. Our degree of attendance is higher, but nobody seems to care about us. It seems like it's a church of elderly. In the Soviet Union, the elderly saved the faith in different decades. This age, which involves 14, 15 million people in Italy, and in 2050, at least 2.5 billion in the world, requests a new approach based on care and love. Let's imagine what we invented from 0 to 30 years old, the kindergarten, primary school, secondary school, universities, master's degree. The first 30 years are well conceived. Then what happens from the 40s on? Well, okay, this is a world for entrepreneurs probably. So then you retire and you have 30 additional years of life to do what? 30 years spent in a garden are so many, and even if you just read magazines. And I'd like to praise Pope Francis when he said, who thinks about the spirituality of this 30-year bracket? We don't want to leave them behind. We don't want to leave them hopeless and with no vocation whatsoever and no mission whatsoever. I remember when I was a young priest, and I remember when the reform completely forgot the elderly to prioritize young people. I can fully remember this. Those big scriptures faded away. With the Sant'Egidio friends, we did it because when we met the elderly in the outskirts, they saw nothing. They didn't even have the books of the Holy Scriptures. This is why I believe that we have to reflect on this. And I'm very happy to see that a meeting of this kind has been organized, as it gives us the chance of becoming aware of a huge reality that is very often neglected, not because the literature and the scripture overlooks these aspects, but it's just because it's like putting poison on a wound, namely a forgotten age and a non-beloved age. And this is why Pope Francis, for the first time, felt the need for a training, a course to identify a new spirituality for elderly people, completely unknown. You can understand urgency of this paradigm shift because we are also responsible as elderly, because when we retire, we think we actually retired, that we don't belong to life anymore. How are we going to spend these 30 years for the gospel? What's the vocation that the Lord invites us to embrace, or that the Lord suggests us to embrace? But since we have digested the idea of being discarded, we are simply happy with that. But this is a major sin. It's a serious omission sin. Well, as I said, I retired, and I frequently speak to elderly and to pensioners. And hardly ever I see that someone said, well, I felt rejuvenated. What's the vocation of Nicodemus or the vocation of Professor Anna who decides to embrace the catechesis? Where is the resurgence of a spiritual, social commitment of the elderly towards the other generations? The fourth commandment is a twofold commandment. I'm not speaking to parents, but we have to tell children that the fourth commandment is that they have to obey their parents. And what happens if Jesus disobey? Well, that commandment, the fourth one, is addressed to adults for them not to forget their parents. It's about honoring, not overlooking. Don Oreste Bensi, when they said, I remember when he said that the Lord invented the family, and we invent the retirement homes. And hospices. I like to underline this because The attendees, the participants in our communities are mostly elderly. We need to rediscover the real vocation and what it means for us elderly to rejuvenate once we embrace a new stage of life. Because living 30 years more is not just the simple result of the development of medicine and healthcare systems. Living 30 years more means relocating this retirement age into a new context. And plus, it means reconnecting generations. And we often forget to speak about it, especially when we consider our final destination that involves us all, because it's not just about speaking about death. We, we no longer speak about death. We said someone is gone. No, someone has died, has passed away. We never speak about resurrection of the flesh. I think these issues represent one of the most important priorities of spirituality of old age. For us, our next stage is death. But what does it mean? And what it means life after death? And what does it mean, the resurrection of the flesh? Who knows? Some lay people say we are going to exhaust our energy and we will enjoy that moment. And this is another responsibility, to be honest. And von Balta some years ago said that the construction site of this approach was a closed box, and it's up to us to open it from theology to pastoral care. It is the right time to reconcile these new spheres of life. It is now the time to start understanding again the seriousness and the fragility. I think fragility is probably the most appropriate adjective. Because aren't children frail? And what about our relatives and our elderly? But it's a common misconception that the ideal of a human being is the youth, eternal youth. This is why I asked to myself, why the number of suicides is higher among young men than elderly? And there is a magisterium, bedridden elderly, a huge magisterium on fragility, which is made with body, not with words. But this is disregarded and neglected and never enhanced. I think that there should be an extensive reflection on the different nuances of old age. I was impressed by an elderly woman in Trastevere who approached me and said, I understood why I'm living longer. Because my children are okay, I retired, I have so much time, so much spare time, and I have to pray for peace. So I got a map of the world and I wrote all the names of the countries in the world, and every day I pray for that country as if it was a vocation conferred upon by God. It's a great example. Is it better to receive or to give? Should we push our elderly toward a commitment for the young people and the generations to come to become a life that is worth living? To what extent should we invest in a spirituality? And let me vent on this. We have a fixation with parents, we as priests. Why don't we have a fixation with elderly, as they are capable of teaching their children all the prayers, and since when they come to church, they cannot even pray. Sometimes they forget the words. Would it be better to understand more about this alliance between nephews and grandparents that, as far as the pastoral care is concerned, is explosive? We did the math and we tried to understand the economic worth of time. I mean, the, the time spent with nephews, with the grandchildren, and it's huge. So the value invested with the time spent with nephews and grandchildren, not to mention the affection alliance that allows grandparents to spend time with their grandchildren, distracting them from the use of mobile phone. We have seen more than 70,000 people, young people, in their houses using mobile phones and doing nothing. This is why I believe that the church should push for a new creativity for this age that for the first time appeared just recently. Even the healthcare system, the cosmetic medicine. In Italy, medications are tested on age bracket between 20 40. But we elderly, we take more. And each pill has side effects. If you take 10 pills, and we don't know what happens within the body. Even the pharmaceutical agencies know what happens in the body of an elderly, as they never test those medication on us. So I'd like to push the organization of additional meetings of this kind, as I truly believe that for sure that could be a new spring of the old age. We need a new impetus by the ecclesiastic community on a theological level, on the pastoral care level, on the initiatives, pastoral care initiatives. This is why I am deeply convinced that this conception of inventing a new creativity in the elderly, so by the church, could represent an unprecedented help to our societies and communities. Because all too often we believers can understand how can we support the most fragile people. A consumption-based elderly is not likely to discard them. And I'm not going to delve into the end of life measures that have been implemented over time, but we know that it's mandatory to take care of someone and never abandoning anyone. This is why I am still convinced that we are responsible for instilling a new spirituality for the elderly with the additional support of the elderly themselves. And that would be and would be unfeasible for us to categorize our existence depending on the age brackets. But sometimes we do it. But I think that is quite superficial if we simply break down our existence into categories, because our responsibility is to make the whole world more human. And I think that there is something on which we should commit ourselves. I mean, it's trying to understand better the meaning of existence from birth to the final destination. I think we should start saying, we should start excluding the term end of life. Why? Seneca used to say that. He was not a Catholic philosopher, but he used to speak about the first birth as just the previous stage of the second birth, which happens as you came out from earth. So the life on earth is to be conceived as the initiation to the full life. So it's better to live the life once we age. We have to tell elderly that the best is yet to come. And I like to reiterate this concept with a statement, because Jesus will never be among us anymore, because now he's in a better place, because he's within us. That's the meaning of resurrection of flesh. And this is why destination is a human destination. It's a flesh-based destination. We will never be spirit forever. Jesus speaks about these aspects before his communities, as if it was a great party. Let me conclude with some friends of mine, theologists. We interpreted the sentence by Jesus during the Last Supper, as he said to his apostles, "I will never drink from this cup anymore." Thank you.